Welcome to Shark Felt, where I felt that. Today we are needle felting Kuromi from Sanrio. I start off by rolling up my base white wool and then get out my two-pronged needle felting tool. Then I begin poking out the little ball that I've rolled up to start making it the shape of the head. I continue to poke the wool, rolling it up tighter each time until I have a nice oval shape for her head. This first step can take a really long time because it's when I decide how big or small I want the craft to be, and with Kuromi in particular, I had to go bigger than I normally do because her hood covers so much of her head, leaving little room for her face. Meaning if I had made her head too small, her face would be way too tiny to add any details onto, such as her eyes, nose, and mouth, and it would just end up looking really messy, and we don't want that. Which is why you see me rolling up the head into more wool time and time again, so I have a lot of space to work on the details of her face and her hood later on in the process. Also, accidental bars, let's get it. But anyways, you also see me switching between a larger tool, which holds more felting needles, and it just helps speed things along so that I can finish the head faster. With this final roll-up and poking session, we can move on to crafting the body. Using the same process I did on the head, I grab my base wool, roll it up, and begin poking it into a marshmallow-like shape once it begins firming up. Continuing to poke and switching between my tools, I just keep felting until the shape is more of a melted marshmallow than a formless, fluffy blob. I craft the body in a way where it's thicker at the bottom and tapers off up at the top, giving her a little bit of a booty and a neck so that she's not just built like a can of soup or something else cylindrical. With the same process as the head and the body, I'm going to roll up a little bit of my base wool and then felt it so that she gets her a pair of legs, which will eventually be shaped like those tiny marshmallows that you can find in hot cocoa. One leg down, and one more to go. Now that the basic shape for each leg is complete, I compare it to the body to make sure they're all the right size compared to each other. Taking out my pure white wool, I begin rolling said wool between my fingers and place it on the felting mat. Then I can start to needle felt the palms and finger nubs of her hands or paws. I'm not really sure what you'd call them. She's a rabbit, but also similar to a humanoid girl. Anyways, once they're complete, I get to work on making her some thumbs with wool of the same color as the palms for each palm. Oh yeah, if you're wondering why I'm using some of my colored wool instead of the base one to create her hands, it's because her hands are too tiny to add color to easily in the future, so I just make them out of the color I want the whole body to be later on to save me a lot of time, instead of tediously trying to felt on the correct color to such a small piece later in the project. With the thumbs attached and the hands complete, I tear apart some white wool, then place it onto the legs to replace the base's cream color with the bright white color found on Kuromi. I work all around the legs, including the soles of the feet, carefully poking in the white wool with my felting needle so that it doesn't poke the cream color out onto one of the other sides of the leg. Now that both legs are the respective colors, I can attach them to her body in a splayed out sitting position. I accomplish this by sticking 2 normal needles in each leg and then place them equal distance apart on the body, switching between my largest felting needle and my 2-pronged felting tool to speed the process up and make sure the connection between the legs and body is secure. With that step complete, we can set out coloring the entire body with the white wool, starting at the front and gradually making our way to the sides, back, and bottom. While I'm at it, you see me correct the color on the legs at their connection points to the body because when I attached them, some of that white wool got poked into the cream wool on the body, losing that white color. Oops. At this time, the body is now fully colored in white, and now I can go about adding her some grippers, aka toe nubs. I achieve attaching them by switching between my largest felting needle and two-pronged felting tool, then poking in a divot where the ankle would be, creating a distinction between the foot and the leg. With that out of the way, I move to crafting her arms by pulling out my white wool, then using my largest felting needle to felt some basic tube shapes for said arms. I attach the arms to the hands by roughly poking where I want them to stay, then grab a tiny tuft of white wool and felt it in where they connect, bulking out the top of her wrist. Off camera, I took more white wool and added it to her arms, making them thicker to match her cute, chubby stature. With both arms done, we can attach them to the body. Having placed the normal needles in already, I attach the arms to the body at the top of the neck to give her shoulders, not worrying too much about how neat they are since they'll be covered by her jester hood's neck frills anyway. Looking good. Now we're going to start on her devil tail. I do this by taking out my black wool and putting it into one of the points of a star stencil I own. This is because it'll make the perfect triangular shape that she has at the tip of her tail.
Bruh.
Grabbing a different stencil with the stem of a mushroom on it, I think, I place in my black wool and felt the base of her tail. Man, I love repurposing stencils to my needs so that felting small pieces is easier.
Bruh.
Once both parts of the devil tail are finished, I begin attaching them to one another by felting the connection with my two-pronged felting tool, eventually switching over to my large felting needle. After that, the tail is done, and we can begin attaching it to the body with the same felting needle to ensure that it really stays in there since it's so thin and could easily come loose otherwise. Now, let's revisit the head. I start by pushing in a bunch of normal needles into her head to use as a guide for where the black and white on her face separates. Following the guide, I just continue switching between felting needles and poking in that black wool until her entire head, excluding her face, is engulfed all the way around by her jester hood. With that step finalized, I can take out the normal needles and use the black wool as my new guide for where I want to start felting in the white wool on her face. Continuing to poke, I just keep adding more and more white wool until I'm sure that there's no more cream wool visible on her face, so that it's all one consistent color. Once there's no more white and black overlapping, we can move on to adding the face details. Getting out my pink wool, I place a very small tuft of it above a normal needle I added in the center of her face as a guide and begin to felt her tiny pink nose. With the nose finalized, I grab another small tuft of pink wool and add it to the top part of her hood, overlaying her forehead to start work on her iconic little skull detail. Once it's in the shape of a mushroom, I take a thin strip of black wool and add it to the bottom to shape the teeth ridges of the skull. I make sure to carefully poke and cut these thin pieces because pulling them out entirely and starting over would be really difficult since they're so fine. With the ridges done, I place in another normal needle into the center of the tiny skull off camera and set about crafting its eye holes with more black wool. And oh my gosh, I'm so obsessed with this detail. It came out so cute! With my train of thought back on track, I give Kuromi angel bite piercings by accident off camera as a guide for where I'll felt in a thin strip of black wool to use for her little smiley mouth. Then I snip off the extra bits at the corners of her mouth with my felting shears and clean it all up with a couple more pokes from my medium-sized felting needle. With my guide needles already in place, I take out a tuft of black wool and felt it in above the guide to make her mischievous, beady eyeballs on the right. And then finishing up on the left. Selecting yet another small piece of black wool, I place it right above her eye and needle felt her some eyelashes, 2 on each side to be exact. Which looks super easy in the footage you're seeing, but I'm gonna be real with you, this took me like an hour to get them symmetrical since they're so thin and close to the jester hood's border, but don't tell nobody I told you that. Now that the eyelashes are done, we can move on to the final details. Picking out the same stencil from before with stars on it, I place a medium tuft of black wool onto the felting mat into the point of a large star this time to begin creating her jester frills. Since I don't have a 6-pointed star on any of the stencils that I own, I resort to felting the frills in 2 different halves, using only the top 3 points of the normal star for each half. Now that I've finished both halves, I overlap their fluffy edges on top of each other and begin felting where they connect so that just one piece remains in the end. Rolling up a small tuft of pink wool into a ball between my fingers, I place it on the mat and start to craft her neck pom-poms with a medium-sized felting needle. Now that it's firm enough, I begin to attach it to the underside of the jester hood's neck frills so that when I flip it over, all of the ugly seams, so to speak, aren't visible when she's complete. Then I just repeat that process for all 6 points on the frills. Once that's done, I push normal needles in off camera to hold the neck piece down while I poke a large felting needle into the head to attach them together. With those now connected, we can actually put the head onto the body. I do this by inserting normal needles into the body through the jester frills, then taking my largest felting needle, I gently poke around the neck to join the 2 parts overall. Head and body united, we can jump into crafting her ears. I accomplish this by taking out a stencil with water drop shapes on it, then put a tuft of black wool into the top of the shape to create the points of her ears. Once both tops are created, I take another tuft of black wool to craft the bottoms of the ears into their respective diamond-like shapes. With both tops connected to the bottoms, we will move on to the next step. Rolling up some black wool, I place it onto the felting mat and poke it with my medium-sized felting needle to create Kuromi's ear pom-poms. Now that the pom-poms are shaped correctly and firm enough, I begin to attach them to the tips of her ears. Once combined, we can connect each ear to her head. Normal needles in place, I grab my 2-pronged felting tool and felt the ears into her head. When I'm certain they're in the right spot, I take the normal needles out and continue poking. Now we're moving to the final step. Pulling out my small wool shears, I snip away at any stray fibers that catch my eye so that the completed project will have a more polished look. As you can see, it's usually the flatter pieces that get snipped, but the rounder shapes do occasionally as well. And with that final cut, we can move on to the glamour shots.